Alright, so I know I'm very late to the party on this, but I got really busy last month when Thor Love and Thunder came out, so I didn't have time to make a ranking. And I debated even doing it this late, and wondered if I should only do one per year when the first MCU movie of the year comes out, because I didn't want to have to do one for Thor, just have to do one a few months later for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. But I am planning on updating my live action Disney remake ranking with Pinocchio, even though I just did one in May for Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, so I don't want to seem inconsistent or hypocritical. That, plus the fact that things for the next few weeks are relatively slow as far as new releases, so I need content, and Thor Love and Thunder dropped on Disney Plus this weekend, so I figured now's a good time. That's just a long-winded explanation for why this ranking is almost 2 months late, but hey, better late than never, I guess. Alright, let's get started. Coming in at last place at number 28 is Eternals. A movie that, while I appreciate the cinematography, it doesn't have the story or characters to be interesting. The film is told out of order, moves incredibly slowly, and expects us to keep track of 10 new characters who are all just basically Superman, which makes the movie feel very low stakes. Number 27, The Incredible Hulk. The biggest problem is that Hulk is only really in this movie for like 20 minutes. The rest of this movie is a boring slogfest with an underdeveloped villain. I'm not counting She-Hulk, I'm just counting this as the movie. And apart from Tony Stark showing up in the last scene, it has very little connection to the MCU, again, taking She-Hulk out of the equation, just looking at it standalone. Especially because Edward Norton ended up being replaced by Mark Ruffalo, who had a much more interesting character arc. So the film in the grand scheme of things, again, ignoring She-Hulk, feels very inconsequential. Number 26, Thor the Dark World. A movie whose first 30 minutes are this big exposition dump, and the rest of it is a highly uninteresting story with an uninteresting villain. Apart from the scenes with Loki and a certain character's death, there really isn't any reason for this movie to exist. Number 25, Captain Marvel. A Phase 3 movie that feels like a Phase 1 movie, and if it were a Phase 1 movie, I'd be less harsh on it, but given where the MCU was at this point in time, it feels like a huge step backwards. It basically feels like a cheaper version of Guardians of the Galaxy. People liked the 60s and 70s music in Guardians of the Galaxy, so let's set this film in the 90s so we can cram as many 90s top 40 hits into the film as possible. People liked Baby Groot and Rocket, so let's have a cute alien sidekick in this one. And on top of that, it answers questions that nobody was asking, like how Nick Fury lost his eye and where the name of the Avengers came from. It feels like a story that didn't really need to be told. Number 24, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And a cultishly dark and violent movie that really should have been rated R. The violence is graphic and gratuitous, feeling like it's there more for shock value, and the whole film just has a very dark feeling to it. MCU movies should be fun, but this wasn't fun. It was dark. The plot was also overstuffed and hard to follow, with characters I just didn't care that much about. Number 23, Iron Man 2. A movie that, while it has its fun moments, feels very overstuffed with too many plot lines that just make this feel like a filler episode before we get to Avengers. It feels like when the story was being pitched, they had a bunch of ideas and couldn't decide on just one story, so they crammed as many stories into it as possible. Number 22, Black Panther. It has a likable lead character and actor with some fun spy film type moments, but a weak story that when you really break it down doesn't really make a lot of sense. The dynamics and rules of a Wakandan society don't make that much sense, and it feels a little too reminiscent to films like The Lion King. Number 21, Thor. A movie that looks gorgeous and has some great comedic moments, but a very paint-by-numbers story. Most of the performances in this movie are great, but compared to most of the other films in Phase 1 and the rest of the MCU, it's one of the weaker scripts. Number 20, Iron Man 3. A film that I think actually gets more hate than it should. I know a lot of people mainly focus on and complain about the Mandarin twist, but given what happens in Captain America the Winter Soldier, which is all about using people as fall guys for the bigger evil at stake, I think it ties into that very well, and also given the events of Shang-Chi, it gives it even more weight. Also, I like how they closed out Iron Man's arc at Endgame, but if this had been the last time we saw Iron Man, it would have also been a great way to close out his story. Number 19, Avengers Age of Ultron. Another film of which I do acknowledge its problems, but despite them, I still enjoy. James Spader gives a great performance as Ultron and introduces us to Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and it plants the seeds of Civil War for later. There's also some fun scenes with the team, such as when they're sitting around trying to lift Mjolnir, which, again, becomes important later. I do think the attempt at romance between Bruce and Natasha was weird and unnecessary, because it comes out of nowhere and also goes nowhere. While it isn't as great as the first Avengers movie, there's still enough entertainment value in it for me. Number 18, Doctor Strange. An interesting entry in the MCU because it's probably the first MCU movie since Iron Man where the main character is arrogant and unlikable, yet you're still expected to root for them. There's a ton of fun visuals that make the film interesting to watch and kind of remind me of Inception a little bit and help it stand out from the other entries of the MCU, even if it doesn't really have the strongest plot. Number 17, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. A movie with fantastic world building that's akin to Avatar The Last Airbender, a fun, charming main character, and a lot of fun martial arts sequences, as well as great fantasy elements. It also fixes the Mandarin twist from Iron Man 3. But what does hold it back a bit is Awkwafina's performance. I always find her loud, crass, and annoying. I don't care what movie she's in. I've never liked her in anything. She has no chemistry with Simu Liu, and her lines just aren't funny. But it's still a movie that I find very fun. Number 16, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I like how the characters continue to grow through this movie. I like the relationship between Star-Lord and his dad, even if his dad ends up being a villain in the end. I like the evolution of the sister relationship of Gamora and Nebula, and the father-son kind of relationship between Rocket and Groot, as well as the character arc of Yondu. But I do think the film's comedic timing in some places is a bit off. There are scenes that are meant to be emotional, but instead of letting the moment sit, they immediately follow it up with a joke. You don't always need a joke to lessen the tension. Sometimes it's better to let the audience feel the weight of the moment. Number 15, Thor Love and Thunder. While it does have its issues, the film's strongest element is that it succeeded where the previous Thor films failed by actually making me care about the relationship between Thor and Jane, and closing out Jane's character arc in the best way they could. I do think the villain of Gore the God Butcher was a bit underdeveloped. They should have done a lot more with him. There were a few lines from certain characters that seemed kind of out of character for them, and some of the ideas are a bit rehashed from the other Thor films, but I still enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I was going to. Number 14, Ant-Man. Probably the funniest movie in the MCU. It's got a likable main character who's trying to fix the mistakes he made in his life. It's got a great supporting cast, but what does hold it back is it does borrow a bit too much from Iron Man, but the heist element of the film also makes it very unique as well. Number 13, Iron Man. Though I'm not a fan of Iron Man the character, I do acknowledge that as a movie, it is very well made. Even almost 15 years later, this movie still holds up pretty well, mostly. In a time where most superhero movies were box office and critical poison, this is the one that showed critics and audiences that superhero movies can be well made and take themselves seriously, while also staying fun. This movie seemed doomed to fail by getting the director of Elf and casting the, at the time, washed-up actor Robert Downey Jr., who nobody wanted to work with, but it had all the right ingredients to miraculously work. Number 12, Thor Ragnarok. The most entertaining and arguably most different of the Thor films. It's got sharp writing, a fun atmosphere, and after the first two films were honestly kind of boring, it's refreshing to see a Thor film that's cheesy comic book fun. Number 11, Guardians of the Galaxy. One of the weirdest and most unique movies of the MCU. It's got a great cast with characters who are all trying to fix their lives, and the cast works very well off each other, and has a great soundtrack, and is just a lot of fun. Number 10, Spider-Man Far From Home. A movie that's held back a little bit by the legacy of Tony Stark, making it feel like Spider-Man isn't quite allowed to be his own character yet, which is luckily, for the most part, fixed by the end of the film. It is a bit too crass with some of the humor. I don't think Tom Holland and Zendaya are believable as a couple, but it's got a great villain and a pretty good twist ending. Number 9, Black Widow. If Brad Bird ever decides to do Incredibles 3, this is a film he should take inspiration from, because this is what Incredibles 2 should have been. The family of superheroes, while also being a spy movie, feels like Incredibles fused with Mission Impossible, and it has one of the most despicable non-superpowered villains in the MCU. Number 8, Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man's first official entry in the MCU is a fun one. It plays a bit like a teen movie from the 80s, specifically Ferris Bueller, and Michael Keaton has a lot of fun as Vulture, and what makes him interesting is that he's not necessarily a bad person. He's just trying to provide for his family. He's just resorting to illegal methods in order to do so. This movie's fast-paced, has a lot of humor, and is one of the fun entries in the MCU. Number 7, Captain America, the First Avenger. What makes this film unique is up to that point, all the main characters have been billionaires, dinguses, or gods, but Steve Rogers is none of these. He's just an ordinary guy who wants to do the right thing, which makes him a lot more relatable. And making the film a World War II period piece with a bit of superhero elements makes it stand out from the other films. Number 6, The Avengers. A great payoff to 6 films of build-up with a cast that works incredibly well off each other. While it's not as ambitious by today's standards as some of the later entries of the MCU, at the time it was pretty revolutionary, and honestly, it still holds up. Number 5, Captain America Civil War. Fantastic script that lets the audience choose their own side. It introduces us to Black Panther and Spider-Man, and also gives us one of the best third-act fights in any MCU movie. But I still have a couple of issues with it. Firstly, as I always bring up in these rankings, Cap is kissing his niece. And even if we didn't know that at the time, he's still kissing a woman he barely knows, so either way you slice it, it's weird. And secondly, the way they introduced Spider-Man could have been done a bit better, because May just lets Tony, this adult she's never met, be alone with her teenage nephew in his bedroom, where he then locks the door and then tells him to lie to her about where he's going and what he's doing. She does not have any stranger danger red flags. May is just a terrible guardian in this movie. Number 4, Captain America the Winter Soldier. A superhero movie that doesn't really feel like a superhero movie. It's more of a Tom Clancy-esque political thriller, which is what helps us apart from the other MCU films. It's got no issues and is so perfect that not even honest trailers could make fun of it, much as they tried. And for people like me, we also shipped Captain America and Black Widow, so it's a shame that never went anywhere. Number 3, Avengers Endgame, an almost perfect finale to the Avengers/Infinity Saga. What holds it back a bit is some of the parts of the final battle are a bit contrived, and Cap going back in time to live with Peggy now means in Civil War he's kissing his niece. They weren't related at the time, but now they've made them related, which makes it even weirder. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War, the ultimate payoff to 10 years of build-up. A movie that, given how many characters it has, theoretically should not work. But somehow it does. The various actors all work very well off each other, the writing is compelling, the action sequences are exciting. Thanos is not only the best villain in the MCU, he's possibly one of the best villains in cinematic history, right up there with Darth Vader. It also has one of the most shocking twist endings in any movie. And coming in at number 1 is Spider-Man No Way Home, the movie that Spider-Man fans have been waiting 20 years for, and the payoff is worth it. All 3 live-action Spider-Man actors work very well off each other, have very natural and fun dynamics, as do the villains. For people like me who grew up watching all the Spider-Man movies, this is the ultimate dream. It's awesome that a movie like this exists. We thought it would never happen, and it has. Now, nostalgia aside, it also gives MCU Peter a great character arc. No longer is he living in the shadow of Iron Man. He is now his own person. It's very likely we haven't seen the last of Tom Holland as Spidey, but even if we have, this is the perfect way to close out his character. So it comes in at number 1. I'm going to share your ranking of the MCU films, and I cannot believe that I have to do this ranking again in a couple of months when Wakanda Forever comes out, but I'm going to have to do it. So let me see your ranking, and that includes Thor Love and Thunder, and I will see you next time.